Hi everyone! In this video I am going to be drawing a floral still life with colored pencils. This is my most ambitious drawing to date and took me over 50 hours to draw. I used Prismacolor, Polychromos, Luminance, Derwent Lightfast, Derwent Drawing, and Holbein pencils, and I drew this on Legion Rising Museum Mount Board 2-ply. You can see me getting started on the first big flower, which was the focal point for my drawing. I spent a lot of time working on these stamens to make sure they looked as realistic as possible. I used an indenting technique to create texture in the tips, followed by a few layers of reddish-brown pencils. Moving on to the base of the stamens, I tried to make sure that each one was separate from the one next to it. I used a few different shades of Naples ochre and some sharp brown pencils to make sure my edges were nice and crisp. For the petals, I started each one by drawing in the veins using Derwent Drawing Wheat. This is a nice neutral shade that stood out from the cream petals without being too obvious. I used several layers of Prismacolor and Holbein cream pencils on the main portion of the petals in order to create a nice smooth texture. And then this was all blended with Utrecht Nude odorless paint thinner. Moving on to the second flower, I approached it in a similar way as the cream flower. I just needed a few darker oranges and reds. Used lots of the Holbein light red and Indian red from Polychromos, and then some of those same Naples yellows on the stems, filling in between those stamens with a dark brown, again just to create separation and some values there. The veins on this one were drawn in much darker, and it's really important to make sure these are placed correctly in order to give shape and movement to the petals. This cute little flower bed was really fun to draw. The base is dark, lots of dark browns where it blends into the background, but there are several different other colors here, including yellows, oranges, and reds. It's actually one of my favorite parts of the drawing, and I recorded a complete video tutorial for this flower bed all by itself. The Patreon tutorial for this drawing has 6 complete modules, one for each of the main flowers, one for the background, and then I did an overview video that included some of the tips where I talked about different techniques that I used to complete this drawing. So if this video is moving way too fast for you and you want to learn how to draw this, you can go over to Patreon and check that out. And just when I was getting tired of drawing with creams and oranges, I got to start working on the pink flowers here on the side of the piece. This top flower is just a jumble of petals that don't really make sense as you're drawing them, but by the end they all come together. When I'm working on a flower like this, I just draw each petal one by one, starting with the easiest, sort of like working a puzzle. You find or draw the first piece that makes sense, and it's easier to find or draw the next. I used way too many different pencils in the first pink flower, but by the time I got to the second, I had my palette narrowed down to just a few reds, pinks, and peach pencils. And I realized that I could make things much easier on myself by outlining the petals first. I did this with Polychroma's Middle Cadmium Red, which was one of my go-to pencils. Keep in mind, if you outline one petal, it should eventually become the shadow of the petal behind it. I never want my drawings to look outlined. So be careful as you do this that you use a color that can be blended into the shadows as you work. You should see what I mean as this time lapse progresses. Watch as the outlines become shadows for the next petal as part of that shared edge. In this last part of the video, I will be jumping around as I work on different parts of the background. For the leaves, I used a combination of black mixed with olive green from Prismacolor. Depending on how dark I wanted the leaves to be, I used more or less of the green. It was important to create a dark contrast to the bright flowers, so I used lots of black and dark gray in the shadows. Prismacolor has a really nice line of gray pencils that makes it easy to create a gradient that blends out beautifully. Here I used French gray 90, 70, 50, and 30%. This final flower was similar in process to the other two pink flowers. I added Prismacolor Raspberry to my color mix, and you'll see me use a lot of that pencil. I also added some black to the shadows because I wanted to create a bit of a vignette in the corners and around the edges of the piece. And here once again is my final drawing. If you are interested in learning more about this drawing, check out the Patreon tutorials that I mentioned earlier in the video. And otherwise, I will see you in my next video here on YouTube. Bye everybody.